Hey everyone, welcome back to the 39th episode of the Younger Half podcast. In today's episode, we have a special interview with my dad who volunteers as an EMT. So let's get started. So the first question that we have is can you talk a little about your history with being an EMT and when you joined the ambulance corps and how long have you been serving on it?
Sure. But before I do that, I got to say, guys, that I just want to say before we start, when I was 14 years old, I was also recording a podcast. I was involved in very important things. I was slightly more deranged when I was 14 than you guys. But no, it really is extremely impressive what you've done. I've admired it, and that you've dedicated your time to doing something positive and honing your interview skills and all these people that you've interviewed. It's really amazing. I'm really impressed with what you've done. So I just want to say that before we start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. So my history as an EMT when I joined in 1992. I was 16 years old. So I've been on the ambulance corps for, do the math real quick, about 29 years. And I joined because a friend of mine, he brought me down there once. He was a member there already, and I heard the buzzer go off and they went out on a call, and I sat there, and then they came back, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I spent the summer in Pittsburgh. We had a friend that summer, and I took the EMT course in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, actually. I was the youngest. Yeah, I was the youngest by far.
Oh, actually, yeah.
Yeah, like with a bunch of adults, and I was this little kid, and I never really took my studies seriously, but I took that seriously, and I studied, and I joined, and I've loved it ever since. And I've been in 6,000 calls by now, and I've been in like thousands of homes in Teaneck on thousands of calls, and been able to help people that I know, Joshy, that you know.
Yeah.
And it's been a wild ride. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Wow. So the second question, you kind of touched up on this, but like, why did you become an EMT? Like, I know you heard like the siren or whatever, and you really said you're gonna do it, but like, is there any other reasons?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll be honest with you. You know, any person you ask why they volunteer or why they're an EMT or something like that, they always say to help people, and of course that's true. But you know, there's also, you know, for the younger folks, maybe more male, like they're interested in the excitement. Like that's the honest truth, and that's probably why I started to do it. But over the years, you know, as I matured, you know, there was parts of me that really did, you know, want to help. And there's many, you know, when you're an EMT, you see people at their worst, right? Their most desperate hour very often, or when they are most in need of help. You know, you can be all types of people that are, you know, CEOs and executives and doctors and lawyers and very powerful people in their private lives, but you'll come across them as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, and they're in their most desperate hour. And, you know, what I worked hard on was like not allowing that to get to my head, of like just focusing on helping the person and not let the ego get in the way. And, you know, you've heard a lot of stories, Josh.
Yeah.
I can tell one. You want me to tell a story?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Do that later. Okay,
that's
fine.
2 questions away.
All right,
so.
but you know that. But so the answer is, I joined for the excitement. I joined for the social aspect. I joined because it was like, you know, like you are, Josh. You like to be involved in productive things, and
you had a few friends also there.
A few friends, things that are interesting. But ultimately, over the years, it became, you know, I still enjoy the excitement, but I also, you know, I like to be able to help people. People help people in different ways, but this is like, some people clean up the shul after mincha, but for me, like, this was my way of trying to help and give back.
Okay, so I kind of know the answer to this question, but how has your work shifted during the pandemic? Like, are you still taking calls and everything like that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So here's the story with that. You know, this was way back last March. I went on a call that took the very first COVID patient to the hospital in Teaneck. The very first one. I was in the building. It was during my shift, and we got a call, and they called the building, the police department, and they said, we think this is a COVID person. And this was back when it was totally not normal. They didn't know how to deal with it. Nobody knew anything. And we got dressed up in the entire hazmat suit and like 7 pairs of gloves and, you know, 4 helmets and, you know, 7 pairs of shoes. And we went down there, and there was this lady that had been, at the gym or something like that, where a known person was there and who had COVID, and she was experiencing symptoms, and it was very anxiety provoking. We didn't know how to deal with it really. And we took him to the hospital. We called them on the way, and the hospital was totally not set up. So we got there, and they made us sit in the truck for 20 minutes with this patient until they figured out, like, where do we
Wow.
put them? How do we do it? What are our procedures? They didn't know anything.
This is what, like early
This
March or
is
so?
March. Yeah. This is like literally the very first patient with COVID in Teaneck is the one I took. So,
That's crazy.
anyway, so we dropped her off at the hospital. Like, we cleaned up really well, and we scrubbed the ambulance, and I came back home, and I told mom,
Right.
that I had taken it. And, she said, listen, I'm just not comfortable. We got kids at home, and she has to work, and I have to work. And
For
I'm
like
just,
another week.
yeah, I'm just not comfortable with you taking calls. And I totally understand that. I totally understood it. Right. And so, to prevent myself from like making any stories in my head later, right? Of like, oh, I'll just go on to whatever it was. I right away took out my phone. I texted the captain. I said, I'm out for right now. And so I stopped going on calls. I have not been back on the ambulance since, but again, because my wife asked me to she was not comfortable. So I have to honor her wishes. And but I was able to help in other ways. You're gonna ask
Yeah,
later
yeah.
about
No,
this?
you go for it
Go
now.
for it. Okay, so like I said, I've been a member of the Amscore for 30 years, and it was very, very strange. I don't even think they have an explanation for it. But Eitan, you probably know this too. That like COVID, like there was this epicenter, at least in New York, New Jersey, of COVID, like concentrated in Teaneck, New Jersey. Like very
Wow.
bizarre. I don't even know if they figured it out. So what was happening was the volunteers that were still taking all these calls, there were other volunteer organizations in New Jersey that said, we don't go on COVID calls. We don't take them. You can find another ambulance. There's towns that said that. There are towns that they
Crazy.
stopped responding because they didn't have enough people that were willing to. But in Teaneck, they stayed. And they were seeing so many calls. They were so overwhelmed that I have some experience in my career, like talking to the media. So I put together like a what we call it, like a pitch. You guys do this when you reach out to someone to join your
Yeah,
podcast,
yeah.
right? Yeah, you put together a pitch. Here's why. Here's who we are.
The good old copy pasted email from
Yeah,
Google Doc.
yeah. So I put together a pitch, like, here are the stats, like it was crazy. We had like 6 members that were in the hospital, 2 were in the ICU, and, our call count is up 100%, like all these crazy stats. And I started emailing a bunch of news organizations. So, and they were all trying to cover COVID at the time. And this was a very, very fascinating, I don't want to say fascinating, but fascinating story for them. This
Right.
volunteer organization, overwhelmed,
Right.
overrun. And so the New York Times wrote about us, the Wall Street
Yeah.
Journal, ABC News.
Broadcasted on ABC. I remember
Yeah,
that.
it was
Yeah, I've
broadcasted.
seen all that, so I
Yeah.
didn't know you were behind it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, I was really, really, actually, the word I would use is distraught. I was distraught. Imagine you're a member of this place for 30 years. You have to honor your wife's wishes, but you're watching all your friends and your colleagues taking these calls and risking their lives, and you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs. So I was like, let me figure out a way to
Right.
help. And actually, they received over $100,000 in donations
Wow.
from that media coverage. So I
Right.
felt like I at least did something. I didn't leave my computer, but I didn't risk my life. They were really the heroes. I just sent a couple emails,
Yeah,
but at least I could do something. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
for sure. So this question, I think at least me and Josh, we've been waiting for. I assume Josh knows most of these stories, but
Yeah,
tell us
probably.
You.
your most yeah.
Uh,
So tell us your most interesting story as an EMT.
Yeah, you give a
Give a
few
couple.
stories. Yeah,
Okay, so here's
Yeah.
one of the most interesting is, if you guys remember, or maybe you don't actually.
this is a classic. I know.
You,
I
you
know what
do
you're gonna
not remember
say.
this. I was gonna say you remember it,
The,
but you would have been like 2 years old.
I know what you're gonna say. Yeah.
So you've probably heard of it though. The
Yeah.
Miracle on the Hudson, which is when an airplane took off from
Yeah.
I think it was LaGuardia, and it ran into some birds,
Right.
and they had to land in the Hudson River. And so here's the story behind that. It's like really wild. I have this good friend who's also on the ambulance corps, and he was
Yeah,
he
this-
was the duty crew that day, which means you're in the building. A call comes in, you're in your uniform, and you take a call. If there's another call while they're out, we have these pagers, and a pager goes off, and you drive to the building and you take the ambulance and you go. So my friend was on this call. He was on, one of those typical type of calls we go on at an old age home. An old lady fell and he was going to help her up, and they paged out and they said something like, call the desk when you get here. Like, they didn't say what the call was. I'm like, all right. I was, I guess, around. So I went down to the building. I took the truck. I called the desk. They're like, there's an airplane down in the Hudson River and you guys have to go. And so, we grow to be friendly with these guys. I'm like, no, seriously, George, what is it? He's like, no, I'm telling you, there's an airplane down in the Hudson. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. So he said, you have to go stage at Giant Stadium, which means, go there and wait.
In jets.
Yeah. We don't like to admit that. But so I get in the truck and we drove down the turnpike and we go to Giant Stadium. And what happens is they collect 10 ambulance crews. And when there's 10 crews, then they go to the scene. So we were the second crew there. We had 10 ambulances. We all went in a caravan going. You can imagine this, going down the New Jersey Turnpike, 10 ambulances. We go down to Weehawken, which is where the people were picked up by boats in the river and taken to the New Jersey side, which is Weehawken. So we went down there and there was dozens of ambulances, and they gave us 2 patients and they said, take these 2 people to Jersey City Medical Center. And I said, where is Jersey City Medical Center? And the guy's like, I don't know. So I said, okay, this is before the GPS days.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, I was like, I had no idea what
he knows our town very, very well because he was riding when there was no GPS. Yeah. So he knows like
right.
a ridiculous like random streets on the outskirts or whatever. But he's never been in like Jersey City really. Like, so why'd you know where that is?
And the amazing thing was people weren't really injured at all. I mean,
right.
They were in good
Didn't
spirits.
you like, it wasn't something like about their arm, like one lady or something like that, or a leg, like maybe.
I think it was like everybody goes, if you're in a plane crash, you go to the hospital.
Yeah.
That's like the rule, right?
Yeah.
So I started driving. I knew it was south. I drove south. I'm like kind of wandering through the streets. And then at one point I came across a Hoboken police officer and I said to him, hey, I got 2 in the back from the plane crash. Can you get me to Jersey City Medical Center? He said, sure. So we followed him and weaving, and down in that area, the streets are very narrow. And so we were weaving in and out, and we took him to the hospital. And then, so that was one.
That's like, that's crazy. You're like, I remember hearing that like the first time a while ago, like it's crazy. Like when he told me that, it's like he's like there, like everybody knows about that story. You were there.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in a lot of car accidents. I was on a car accident on Route 95 where this woman got onto Route 95 in Fort Lee, if you know the area. So that's like several miles north of Teaneck. She drove the wrong way. It was the middle of the night. She drove the wrong way on the highway, and she hit another car head on. 6 people, and she was drunk, so she like twisted her ankle, and the other people did not do as well.
Yeah,
it's always that way, right?
Yeah, always, every time. What else you got?
What else I got?
I've been on a few.
Yeah, you've been on a couple calls.
Yeah,
right?
I remember one time. I think the guy, some guy fainted in the shower.
Yeah.
You remember this? And then I was there. And I remember the lady was like very nervous, and I was very young. I was like, I don't know, like 5 or 6, and she asked me if I wanted like cookies or like something like that. I remember that.
Yeah, she was very nervous, so she focused on this little boy as a way of trying to, relax.
So you helped out, Josh. That's good.
Josh helped out. That was the beginning of his career.
Yes.
Keep going.
I've been on, a whole bunch of house fires.
The one where were you there when the house, like a house could
explode?
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. That's a good one. I was there when there was a house that blew up in Teaneck.
Like literally a block away, or like 2 blocks, something like that.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
That was a while ago, because I remember Mom thought, like, we were younger. Mom thought, because like the chandelier in the dining room, like it chandelier, it shook a lot. And I remember, like, I've heard this before. Mom, she thought we were like jumping upstairs, so she told us to stop jumping, because that's how like big like the explosion was. Like the door.
It was crazy. There was a guy walking across the street, so you can imagine a pretty wide street in Teaneck. The house exploded, and a person walking across the street was hit by the front door of the house.
Whoa!
Blew the whole thing. It was. I've never seen a house. It was just reduced to rubble. There was a house, and it was gone.
Right. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to finish up with like 1 or 2 more? Or is that about it?
Let's see.
Or the rest are just like some generic stuff.
You know what? It's like trying to remember.
Also on the spot, so.
We went to one where this guy was cutting a tree with his chainsaw.
Oh, you're just telling us that last night.
And it like kicked back and almost tore his arm off.
Yeah.
That's
Crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually, so here's a funny one. We were called because the state police were chasing someone, like a criminal. And it was like, there's the part of Teaneck, we're in the south by the Glen Point Hotel. There's a bunch of like marshes there by the side of 95, which is like, it's
like
kind of swampy. Yeah. So there was a helicopter overhead and they were searching and searching and searching. The dog found him in the swamp and like they dragged him out and he was covered in mud and we had to take him to the hospital. Another one was they were chasing this guy and he went down the street. And so if you can imagine this, the street dead ends with a house. So it's like dead ends to a house. And there's a place to turn before us. And he was driving away from the police at like 70 or 80 miles an hour. And he didn't miss the turn and he just he went right into the house.
Wow.
No, that was years ago.
Because like someone just drove into a house in Teaneck like a few weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like off the highway.
Right? Yeah.
Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, so those were
so many stories.
Right. Yeah. So the next question we have is what challenges came up as an EMT during the pandemic and how like did you face like some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I was telling you about like my involvement, but I'll tell you the challenges that the ambulance corps, faced. I mean, we would take, on a busy day, like 12, 15 calls, and they were taking like 25 or 30 calls a day, like volume-wise. During the pandemic, there was this one lady who told the crew that, that she was tested positive. And then she just left the hospital and she was like walking around just like, meeting with people like nothing was happening.
Wow.
But they were, they had issues with like proper equipment. They had issues with, we had one guy who came home and gave COVID to his parents.
Yeah.
And like he was thinking he might have killed his parents. We had one guy who came home and gave COVID to his partner and his partner ended up in the ICU. It was just crazy for a while. It was very, very challenging for them. Just being able to cover the calls, having enough people. And I mean, you don't join the ambulance corps. Like the way I said this to the media a bunch of times is like, nobody joins the ambulance corps at 16 or 18 years old and thinks they're legitimately going to risk their life.
Right.
And that's what they were faced with.
Right.
Like I didn't think that.
Right.
Like you join.
Okay.
What's the most dangerous thing that's going to happen to you in Teaneck on the ambulance?
Like
corps?
what? One of the patients will like
get upset.
Yeah.
You get into an accident with one of those trucks. There's like not a scratch on it. It's so massive. But those were the challenges.
So like I guess this is really the last question. Josh might have a few like follow-ups or whatever, but like the town like Teaneck that you're a member in is like obviously it's a volunteer. Our towns around us also volunteer, and like what are your general thoughts about being a volunteer on an ambulance corps versus like being paid, etc.
Yeah, when I first joined, the EMS system is such that every single town around us was volunteer. I mean, I think there was one or two that was like paid maybe during the day, but everything was volunteer. And now we are literally like the only volunteer town left.
Wow.
And it's really interesting. The story behind why that is really interesting. So when I joined, almost 30 years ago, so maybe like in the years leading up to that point, there were a group of core, like really intelligent and
like the veterans,
forward-looking veterans, like forward-looking people that were there that understood how to keep people engaged in the ambulance corps. What they did was they instilled a tremendous amount of pride in the ambulance corps. So where we had these big trucks with like way too many lights, and like everybody made fun of us and they rolled their eyes, oh, here comes Teaneck with all their lights. But what happened is it instilled a sense of pride. Like you had this big, nice truck and you were proud of it. And there was this, like, if we ever sent a call to mutual aid, which means we didn't cover it, another town had to come in, everyone in the ambulance corps knew about it and we were upset about it. So there was this pride that was built in the corps so that people, took pride in covering the ambulance corps, and other ambulance corps didn't have the same thing. I'm sure they did a great job, but they didn't have that sense of pride. And that's the reason why I think, at least, we're still around, because there was this pride, and our trucks are still big and they still have more lights than the others, but it creates a sense of pride.
Right.
So Yeah.
So has that like it's like I say like a long time ago. So is that like still that's still like a principle, or is that like kind of
Yeah.
changing like a little bit
No, it's
with
still a
newcomers, or it's
principle.
the
You
same?
know, the original people that built that, most of them are gone. There's one or two people that are still sort of around, but they built it into the culture. In other words, if
Right.
you join now and I hand that to you and teach
Then
you
just
about
keep
that,
right.
you keep that going. So the hope is that that continues. But every town around this is now paid. What that means is like, if you call an ambulance in Bogota, which is the town next to us, a
Right.
holy name hospital ambulance will show up.
Will you be billed for it?
You will be billed for it.
Yeah, like that's the biggest thing. Like TNEC is like free, which is
Yeah.
they send you a donation card after, but
Right. If you call in Englewood, an Englewood hospital ambulance shows up. And I'm sure they're very capable, but they're not two people from your community. Like when I
Right.
go into someone's house, these people, this is someone from my community. I'm interested in helping them.
Right.
So that's something to be very
you like
proud
feel
of.
Interesting. I didn't
closer to
know.
them or whatever.
Yeah.
So what out like specifically? Is Bergenfield still like is that like
Bergenfield is a volunteer ambulance
that's
corps,
a town
but
next to us, by the way.
they staff the truck during the day. They pay the people to be on the truck.
Right, because I was gonna ask, like, I know there's like a BVAC, so like I was curious
Yeah.
if like a hospital is going on. So like,
Yeah.
so does Englewood not have evac? It just
No,
has
they
a
don't.
hospital.
They don't. They're just hospital.
I
On
thought Inglewood like just started a volunteer. I mean, they might have.
oh, that was
I don't know.
that was I think like at Sala, I think.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there's a lot of like drama with that because like
Yeah. Okay, so that's what we have. Thank you very much for coming on. It was really good to hear about your experiences at EMT and everything about that.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed this, and
Yes,
I'm
thank
honored to
you.
join your podcast. I hope you guys keep going. You're doing an awesome job,
Thank you.
and it's great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.